All right, welcome to my channel, guys. This video is going to be about Git, the version control system. Um, Basically, I just want to make this video because some of the concepts, when you watch other videos, they just use command lines, and some of the concepts get blurred. So I think it's easier when you just visualize everything. So that being said, um, let's think about how we're working. So right now I'm SSH'd into a DigitalOcean droplet. Okay, so I'm on a server. So you could be working on a server or you could be working in a local environment, right? So it could be, let's say, Linux, could be Windows. There's a Git for Windows, and it could be WSL, right? In any case, you've got your file system, got a bunch of folders, right? Let's say, I don't know, configs. You got app1, okay? You got app2, right? And you've got everything else that goes into, um, let's say, your system, right? So you've got all these nice folders here, okay? So you're working on app1, right? And maybe you're just starting out, or maybe you've reached a certain point where now you want to start tracking changes in the app, right? So you've got so many files and folders that, if you want to make a change, you want to know what's going on, what happened. Maybe it's for yourself, maybe a different team member, but in any case, you want to track that, right? So the way we're doing that is obviously through Git. And the first thing to kind of understand is the difference between your workspace or your working directory, right? Working, let's say workspace, and your repository, your repos, which is what Git is all about, right? So the idea here is that when you're working on your app, right, everything in that folder is your workspace. So let's say you have, I don't know, your Docker file, right? You've got your Python, let's say, maybe you got some static files, okay? And I don't know, a requirements.txt, who knows, right? But you want to be able to make this your first version. You want to kind of start that as your baseline, right? So this all gets considered as V1. And then let's say you make a change to your Rex. Let's say you're adding, you're working with Postgres, you're adding a new library, let's say psychopg2. So now this isn't the same file anymore, right? This becomes, it could be named the same, right? It could be named the same, but it now includes, or maybe doesn't include something, maybe it excludes something. But this case, it includes a new line for psychopg, right? Psychopg2. So now we've got that. So now this whole thing right here, because we're tracking all of these, can now be considered version 2. So at any point, if I want to look at the changes between these two, I can track that. Or let's say I want to go back to this one. I can go back to that file system, right? So the idea is I'm tracking all of the different versions. So let's go back here. I'm gonna just delete this. Okay. So the key here is we want to have our area where we're doing our work, and we also want to have a file system, which is what a repository is. It's just a file system of different versions, right? So that's basically what this is, okay? So that's the first thing, is we want to be able to track those changes, right? And the other aspect is, well, where are we going to keep this repository? Okay, so let's say this server crashes. How do we get this? We can have a backup, and that's kind of what this is. It's a backup, just includes different history, right? So we can have that locally, obviously, right? we can have a local Git, okay, Git repo. So let's actually put that in our app.git, usually what they're called. So it could be local. It could be on a work network, right? So let's say you're working with different colleagues and you want to be able to track stuff that's on your work network server. Or it could be our favorite GitHub. So now let's say your server crashes, you can go to GitHub, you can pull this, you can clone this repository, right? And then go back to where you were. So a little too many lines here. Let's do that. So let's get our kind of first step going. Let's, for this example, figure out where our workspace is. Okay, so on the server, we've got different files, and I'm actually in it already, but let's do this. So cd home Jake, we've got 2 here, and I'm going to want to start tracking ABD. Okay, so ABD is kind of our app folder. It includes all the files. You can forget about this one for now, but includes the volumes for any containers, has a couple of fast API apps, has a Django app here, an old volume we're not going to use, a picture, some static files, maybe JavaScript, CSS, got a Postgres dump file here. Anyway, we've reached the stage where if we make any changes to any of these files, we want to be able to know that, right? And we can pick and choose. We don't have to track all of them, but in this case, I want to start tracking all of them, right? So we've got step number 1 out of the way. So this next step is, hey, let's make a repo, right? More specifically, let's get the first version going. So got A, right? Okay. And that's done pretty simply. So what we can do is we can make this file here, make this folder inside our workspace. Okay, and we can call that a local repo. And all you have to do is basically go into that folder and type in git init. Now, this can be done as a bare repository somewhere else, but for now, let's just make that repository here, right? So we've got an empty repository now. So basically what we've got is we've got this folder minus any versions. So we still haven't included anything in it, right? So this folder is just empty, okay? So we've got that, no versions here, right? So the first thing we want to do is, well, we want to figure out which ones we want to track, right? So how are we going to figure out which ones we're going to track? Well, we're going to stage, okay? Stage or track, let's say track whatever files that we want. So in this case, I want to track everything. Okay, this app, I want to track everything. And I'll go over what git ignore is, but right now let's say I want to track everything. And that's really simple. All I have to do is type in git add, right? Git add everything in the file, and it's going to do that. It's going to take a little bit of time because it's got all that stuff in it, but actually I should have shown you the folder here. So let me do that. So when I did that init, it created this file system here, git, right? .git. If I go into .git, actually, yeah, let's get into .git, show you. So this is all the stuff that's in that repo, right? Now, when I added those files, right, all I did was I started tracking it. So now the repo is looking at all this stuff. So all it's doing is basically saying, hey, if there are any changes in here, we're going to know about it. Let's say I didn't track one of these, right? Let's say I only tracked these 3. Okay. Well, if there were any changes made on that Docker file, I wouldn't know about it. Okay, Git wouldn't know about it. But in this case, we're tracking all of them, right? We did an add and we got everything in there. So you can check that by just looking at the status. We actually got to go back, Git status. Okay, so all of this stuff is being tracked, right? It's telling us, hey, there's a new file here. It's being tracked. So we know that. Now the next step is, do we want to commit it to our repo? Okay, but let's say there was something that we wanted to do. Let's say we wanted to make a new file, new folder, let's say, or let's do hey.txt, right? So we've got a new file here that's going to be right there. Now, if we go back to where we were here, where we staged all of this stuff, well, now we have a new file, right? That file hasn't been staged yet. So we do hey.txt. That file hasn't been added, right? So if we check the status again, let's clear this up, git status, it's going to tell us actually, hey, we're not tracking this. So if you make any changes inside hey.txt, we're not going to know about it, right? So if we go into hey.txt right now, there's nothing in there. But let's do, we're just here on YouTube, right? We're going to save that, exit, right? So, hey, we're just here on YouTube. But guess what? That change, right, from when it was nothing to hey, we're on YouTube, that's not going to be tracked, because if we look at the status, it's not looking at the changes, right? So actually, let's go back into hey.txt and let's change this to, hey, we're learning Git, right? Get out of there. And we'll do a cat hey.txt. Hey, we're learning Git. Well, if we look at the repo wasn't tracking any changes. So it doesn't know that we just made that change, right? It doesn't know that we just typed that in. All it knows is that it's not tracking this file. So if we want to, we can do git add hey.txt, and then we can go into git status. Oh, git status. And now we're tracking everything, right? So now this is being included in here. But guess what? We still don't have a version. Okay, all this stuff is being tracked, so any new changes being made, we're going to know about it, but we still haven't saved it to the repo. So if you wanted to get version 1, you couldn't do that because it hasn't been committed yet. And so the next step is we're going to commit. Once we commit, that's going to lead us to our first version. Okay, so let's commit this. It's going to ask us for our user, right? Let's do git config user.name is Jake. Git config user.email is, say, Jake at. It's really just for our benefits, not getting checked. So git config. And if you want, you can add a global variable to this. But right now we can just try to commit it, and it's not going to let us commit unless we put a message in, right? So please enter the commit message for your changes. Lines starting with hashtag will be ignored, and an empty message aborts the commit. So we definitely have to put something in here to not abort the commit. So let's do, hey, this is our first version, right? So we can save that, and it's going to commit all that stuff. Okay, cool. What does that mean? Well, let's check the status here. That means that everything in here is now in our first version. So basically, we now have a version 1. Okay, we've got version 1. Now let's say you wanted to change this again. Okay, let's say we actually wanted to delete this, right? Let's say we wanted to remove hey.txt. Well, that's not a problem, right? We've deleted that. But guess what? If we wanted to look at our log, right, we see, hey, this is our first version. That's the first commit that we made, right? And it's still tracking all of these files. It's still tracking that hey.txt file that we just deleted. So if we look at the status, right, it's going to tell us, hey, you just deleted this file. I mean, we were looking at it, we were tracking it, it was staged, right? So it's definitely deleted. Change is not staged, right? It's looking at the commit and it's saying, hey, you know, there are things that were being done, and if you want to make that change, you have to track that, right? So we can first track that by, again, going into git commit, or we can try to make a new repository. But let's do a version 2 first, right? So got v1, v2. Okay, v2 is going to be without hey.txt. Okay, so let's do git commit, and it's going to actually tell us no changes added to commit. So we actually have to git commit, actually, sorry, git add git commit. So, hey, we just deleted hey.txt. Okay, cool. It even tells you that, right? So actually, that's my bad, guys. I forgot to mention, first you add, right? So first you add or stage any changes, and then you commit. Okay. Now, if we look at the log, well, if we look at the status, everything's good. Okay. Nothing to commit, working is good. If we look at the log, well, we've got our first commit, which was, hey, we just delete. Sorry, this is the first one. Hey, this is our first version. And then, hey, we just delete hey.txt. Okay, so we're back to where we were originally. So even though this file, version 2, is similar to what we had originally, we have these changes saved in our repo. So at any point, we can go back to either version and we can clone those changes. So speaking of clone, let's look at, we originally said, hey, you can put this on the local, right? But what happens if, for example, the server crashes? And you can actually put this in another local, but let's do that later. So let's try this on GitHub, right? We've got our local here, the local repo. Let's try it on GitHub.